stop! What are you doing in my creek?
I'm watching concrete trucks bury my family's 136-year-old water right now because Willowbrook Estates HOA decided flowing water was too messy for their million-dollar neighborhood. That woman directing the trucks? Their president. Designer sunglasses, Mercedes SUV, and when I screamed at her to stop destroying my property, she actually smiled and said,
"Community improvement sometimes requires individual sacrifice."
My sacrifice? Water my great-grandfather died protecting. Her improvement? The biggest engineering disaster this county has ever seen. Here's what makes this insane. I'm a retired hydraulic engineer. While she's celebrating her concrete solution, I'm calculating exactly how Mother Nature's about to turn her perfect neighborhood into a $2.3 million swimming pool. Physics doesn't care about property values. What would you do if your HOA destroyed your family heritage while smiling? Drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? HOA. Nightmares are spreading everywhere. You want to know how a retired engineer ends up in a war with suburban Karen? Let me paint you the picture. I'm Ezra Blackwood, 67, spent 40 years convincing water to go where the government wanted it to go. After my wife Sarah passed in 2019, I inherited her family's 127 acres in Montana's Bitterroot Valley, including Cottonwood Creek, flowing free since her great-grandfather's 1887 homestead grant. Picture this, 2.3 miles of crystal water dancing over granite stones, pooling under century-old cottonwoods where native cutthroat trout hide in shadows deeper than my morning coffee. My daily ritual was simple. Dawn coffee watching water write poetry in stone, evening fly fishing where the creek whispers secrets to anyone patient enough to listen. The metallic taste of mountain air mixed with pine resin, that's what freedom tastes like before HO, as poison it. Then the plague arrived. Willowbrook Estates. Some developer bought the valley below me in 2021, carved up pristine grassland into 47 lots averaging $485,000 each, marketed it as premium mountain living, with gated security and $800 monthly HOA fees. What buyers got was manicured lawns that looked like golf course putting greens, decorative fountains that screamed, "I'm better than nature," and the privilege of asking permission to plant tomatoes. Running this suburban dictatorship was Vivian Ashworth Sterling, 52, former city planning commissioner who'd crashed and burned in her mayoral campaign. She drove a Mercedes G-Wagon with vanity plates reading HOA PREZ because apparently subtlety died the same death as common sense. Her perfume hit you from 30 feet away, something expensive that smelled like desperation, mixed with entitlement. Here's something funny about HOA presidents. They always think everyone else's property is their jurisdiction practice range. March 2023. Vivian materialized at my gate like a well-dressed tax audit, clipboard armed and ready for battle. "Mr. Blackwood, we need to discuss your creek situation," she announced, like my family's water rights were homework she needed to grade. I set down my coffee, already tasting trouble in the air. "What situation would that be?" "Your water flow is creating aesthetic disruption for our community. It's so uncontrolled, natural." She said natural like it was profanity. "We've prepared a comprehensive improvement proposal." She handed me a folder thick enough to choke a horse. Creek Enhancement Project. Inside were architectural drawings transforming my meandering waterway into a concrete prison with controlled flow dynamics and visual harmony optimization. The plans showed HOA oversight of my creek, because apparently democracy dies when property values are threatened. I laughed until my sides hurt. "Lady, this creek was cutting its channel when your great-grandmother was learning to walk. It'll be flowing free when your HOA is archaeological evidence." Her smile froze like antifreeze in January. "Mr. Blackwood, we're simply maintaining community standards." "Standards? You mean controlling everything visible from your picture windows?" That's when I knew this woman viewed my creek the way Sherman viewed Atlanta. After she left, trailing clouds of expensive perfume and cheaper threats, I researched like my freedom depended on it. My water rights were Fort Knox solid. 1887 homestead documentation establishing prior appropriation, backed by Montana's sacred principle of first in time, first in right. Legal nugget time. Prior appropriation doctrine in Western states means whoever used water first owns permanent rights, regardless of later land ownership. Simple takeaway: in water court, age beats money every single time. But Vivian was building her own case. Within weeks, Willowbrook started property inspections. Translation: driving past my gate every Tuesday at 7 a.m. sharp. The rhythmic crunch of their surveillance tires on gravel became my new alarm clock. And let me tell you, entitlement sounds the same in any driveway. She filed official noise complaints about excessive wildlife sounds from my creek area. Apparently, flowing water and birdsong violated her community's peace ordinances. The woman was systematically building a harassment file, and I could smell the diesel exhaust of legal trouble rumbling down my road like storm clouds gathering over the mountains. April 2023 brought the first real escalation, and like most HOA power grabs, it came disguised as professional due diligence. I was replacing a rotted fence post when diesel engines rumbled down my access road. 3 vehicles materialized through the morning mist: a county surveyor's truck, Vivian's Mercedes command center, and a white pickup loaded with enough equipment to map the moon. The crew chief approached my property line, wearing the expression of a man following orders he didn't fully understand. "Morning, sir. Conducting boundary verification surveys for potential encroachment issues. Just routine property assessment." Routine my ass. While he was talking, I watched his crew unload gear that had nothing to do with property lines. Flow meters, water level gauges, digital cameras aimed at my intake pipe like paparazzi stalking a celebrity. This wasn't boundary verification. This was intelligence gathering. "Assessment of what exactly?" I asked, pointing at their water measurement equipment. The crew chief wouldn't meet my eyes. "Ma'am says there might be confusion about property rights and water access. We're just collecting data." That's when I spotted the real operation unfolding behind the survey theater. 2 crew members had positioned themselves at my cabin's water intake system, photographing every pipe, valve, and connection with the methodical precision of crime scene investigators. They were building a case that I was somehow stealing water from my own creek. The metallic clink of survey stakes being hammered into creek bank stones echoed across the valley like funeral bells, though I wasn't sure whose burial they were planning. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Years of government work had taught me one thing: document everything, because bureaucrats have selective memory syndrome. "Gentlemen, you're currently trespassing on private property and surveying navigable waters without proper authorization." Back in my bureau days, I'd memorized Montana's stream access laws during a particularly nasty dispute over fishing rights. The law grants public recreational access to waters between high water marks, but commercial surveying requires landowner consent, a detail most people never learn until they need it. These boys were operating in a legal gray zone that would collapse under scrutiny. Vivian emerged from her Mercedes like Caesar, reviewing conquered territory. "Mr. Blackwood, this is simply standard environmental assessment. Surely you support responsible water management." "I support keeping survey crews off my land without permission," I replied, still filming, "especially crews documenting private infrastructure while claiming to check fence lines." The surveyor crew was packing faster than tourists fleeing a bear sighting, but the damage was done. They documented everything needed to file official complaints about my excessive water usage and environmental negligence. Here's the thing about living rural. You learn to recognize the sound of trouble approaching long before it arrives. The particular whine of government vehicles on gravel roads carries the same frequency as incoming artillery, and both require immediate defensive action. That afternoon, I spent 6 hours researching Montana water statutes, until my eyes felt like I'd been staring at welding sparks. These survey cowboys had violated trespassing laws, environmental surveying regulations, and basic property rights. More importantly, they'd created a paper trail of their own illegal activity. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez arrived the next morning with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who dealt with too many property disputes. He watched my trail camera footage, while shaking his head like a disappointed father. "These HOA folks think their monthly dues buy them jurisdiction over the whole county," he muttered, writing citations. "They'll get official notice that surveying requires permission, not assumptions about authority." But Vivian had her own legal ammunition ready. Within 48 hours, she'd filed counter-complaints, painting me as a hostile neighbor, using intimidation tactics against legitimate safety assessments. Her version transformed professional documentation into aggressive harassment. The smell of fresh legal paperwork, expensive bond paper carrying cheaper threats, began filling my mailbox like junk mail from hell. Each envelope brought new accusations: improper water management, failure to maintain community-compatible landscaping, and my personal favorite, wildlife habituation hazards, because deer apparently needed HOA approval to drink from my creek. My trail cameras had captured the entire operation, revealing crew members measuring flow rates and photographing infrastructure while claiming boundary confusion. The footage was comedy gold: grown men pretending to survey property lines while obviously studying water systems. I shared the evidence with Bill Henderson, my neighbor 3 properties over, retired Forest Service ranger who understood both water politics and bureaucratic warfare. "Ezra," he said after reviewing the footage, "they're not trying to prove you're wrong. They're building justification to prove they're right about taking your water." 2 nights later, an anonymous note appeared under my cabin door. "Some of us know what's happening. The HOA voted to permanently resolve the upstream aesthetic issue at last week's closed meeting. Stay alert." That evening, reviewing trail camera footage from the creek area, I discovered something that made my engineering instincts scream warnings. Late-night meetings between Vivian and unknown men, huddled around maps and pointing at locations where concrete barriers could be installed. They weren't just harassing me anymore. They were planning to physically steal my creek. May 2023 brought Vivian's bureaucratic masterpiece, and it reeked of corruption mixed with desperation and expensive coffee. I was measuring spring runoff levels when my phone exploded with calls. Bill Henderson's voice crackled through with the urgency of incoming mortar rounds. "Ezra, get to the county building now. They're trying to steamroll you with an emergency hearing." Willowbrook HOA had filed for emergency water management intervention, claiming my creek posed imminent flood danger to their community. The hearing was scheduled for 2 p.m. with exactly 4 hours' notice, enough legal cover to avoid secret meeting accusations, not enough time for meaningful opposition. The county building's fluorescent lights hummed with the particular frequency of democracy dying by committee, while bureaucrats shuffled papers like crooked casino dealers. I arrived to find the hearing room transformed into Vivian's personal theater, packed with Willowbrook residents wearing identical navy polos, like some suburban paramilitary unit. Her opening performance was Oscar-worthy. Professional slideshow, hired expert witness, and photos showing catastrophic erosion damage that supposedly proved my creek was about to destroy civilization as they knew it. But here's where my 40 years of government water work paid dividends. I could smell fraudulent engineering reports from 3 counties away. Those flood photos were grade A bullshit. The watermarks were wrong, debris patterns looked artificial, and the dangerous erosion showed classic signs of artificial flooding. Someone had temporarily dammed my creek upstream, then released it to create dramatic photos. It was like arson investigators torching buildings to prove fire danger. "Board members," Vivian announced with courtroom confidence, "we're not asking to change nature. We're asking to protect families from upstream negligence." Her expert engineer, some guy from Wyoming masquerading as a water professional, recommended controlled concrete channeling for safety and aesthetics. He waved his credentials around like diplomatic immunity, conveniently forgetting that Wyoming engineering licenses mean squat in Montana water law. When they called my name, I approached that podium carrying 136 years of ammunition. "Before we concrete over common sense," I began, spreading historical flood records across their table like evidence at a murder trial, "let's examine actual facts instead of artistic photography." I laid out century-old flood documentation, proving 0 creek-related property damage downstream. This waterway has minded its own business since before Montana was a state. These records show no flooding incidents in 136 years. Then I detonated the legal nuke. Also, Wyoming boy here has no Montana water engineering license. State law prohibits unlicensed practitioners from designing water projects. It's like letting a dentist perform brain surgery. The room went dead silent. Vivian's face cycled through more colors than a chameleon having an identity crisis, while her expert engineer suddenly discovered his shoelaces needed immediate attention. Furthermore, I continued, producing topographical surveys, Willowbrook built in a designated floodplain despite higher ground availability. They chose cheap construction in flood zones, then blamed my creek for their penny-wise, pound-foolish decisions. But here's where the real corruption revealed itself. Board Chairman Davidson listened politely, nodded thoughtfully, then announced they'd table the decision pending additional review, which sounded reasonable until I discovered the fix was already in. A county clerk who'd been shuffling permits since Carter was president pulled me aside afterward. "Ezra, you should know that permit was pre-approved yesterday. Davidson's brother-in-law owns the concrete company that bid this project. Today was just legal theater with a predetermined ending. The corruption was beautiful in its simplicity. Manufacture crisis, hire fake expert, conduct fake hearing, approve fake solution, split real profits. The only genuine element was their plan to murder my creek with concrete. Walking back to my truck, I felt like a man who just learned his doctor, lawyer, and banker were all the same con artist wearing different hats. The system wasn't broken, it was working exactly as designed, just not for people like me. That evening, I sat on my porch listening to water music that might soon be silenced forever. My creek gurgled and whispered over granite stones, completely unaware that bureaucrats had just signed its death warrant in triplicate. My trail cameras revealed the truth hiding behind legal proceedings. Concrete trucks had been staging at the county road junction for 3 days. Survey stakes appeared overnight in my creek bed like grave markers. Late-night meetings between Vivian and construction crews suggested permits were just paperwork delays, not actual obstacles. The diesel smell of heavy machinery hung in evening air like a funeral parlor's flower arrangements, cloying, artificial, and announcing death was coming whether you were ready or not. They weren't waiting for legal approval anymore. Vivian had moved past bureaucratic warfare into direct assault territory, and my creek was about to become collateral damage in her war against anything she couldn't control. The sound of flowing water carried differently now, less like meditation, more like a countdown timer ticking toward concrete apocalypse. Memorial Day weekend 2023 arrived with the stealth of a military operation disguised as a patriotic holiday. 4:17 a.m., Saturday. My trail cameras captured what looked like D-Day logistics rolling down the county road. 4 concrete trucks, a pump truck, and enough construction equipment to dam the Colorado River. They weren't coming to grill hot dogs. The industrial symphony started before my first cup of coffee finished brewing. Diesel engines growling like hungry bears, hydraulics hissing threats, and that distinctive beep, beep, beep of heavy machinery backing up to commit felonies. The mechanical thunder carried across the valley, announcing that Vivian's concrete crusade had reached its final movement. I grabbed binoculars and watched environmental murder unfold in real time. Concrete trucks lined up along my creek like cannons preparing to shell nature itself. Workers in safety gear moved with the efficiency of a pit crew, except instead of changing tires, they were changing 136 years of water flow. Here's what really pissed me off. They thought I'd just watch helplessly while they stole my heritage. I called County Emergency Dispatch, hoping weekend duty might care about crimes in progress. The response carried all the urgency of ordering takeout. "Sir, permit violations aren't emergencies. Call back Tuesday." Tuesday? They were burying my creek on Saturday, and bureaucracy was taking a long weekend vacation. That's when I realized something beautiful. They just handed me every piece of evidence needed to destroy them legally. I launched my drone, documenting federal crimes with the precision of a forensic photographer. GPS coordinates, timestamps, visual proof of Clean Water Act violations worth $37,500 per day. If they wanted to play hardball, I'd give them major league consequences. The concrete assault began at 6:47 a.m., with workers redirecting my creek into temporary pipes, while others prepared the channel bed like gravediggers working overtime. The sound of cement mixing with flowing water was like listening to someone bury a symphony orchestra alive. They poured 847 feet of environmental destruction in 8 hours, forcing my creek into an unnatural 90-degree turn away from their precious landscaping. Concrete weirs created artificial flow control that would make a hydraulic engineer weep, or in my case, calculate exactly when physics would teach them expensive lessons. But here's where Vivian's ignorance became my secret weapon. While she celebrated her concrete victory, I was doing math that would make this the most costly Memorial Day in county history. Her crew had reduced channel capacity by 40%, while forcing water through rigid concrete sections. Natural streams handle floods by spreading into floodplains. Concrete channels handle floods by backing up like clogged toilets, except with million-dollar consequences. The alkaline stench of wet concrete, poisoning creek water, created a smell like industrial death mixed with environmental crime. Within hours, dead fish appeared downstream, brook trout and whitefish, floating like casualties of chemical warfare. Each dead fish was another federal violation, with penalties that would make Vivian's Mercedes payment look like lunch money. By afternoon, I'd moved valuable equipment to higher ground and installed additional drainage around my cabin. Not because I was worried about flooding, because I was preparing to document the most expensive engineering failure in Montana history. Sunday brought Vivian's social media victory tour. Facebook posts celebrating the completed environmental protection project, with hashtags about community leadership and proactive flood prevention. Her neighbors commented with praise for her decisive action against upstream negligence. The irony was delicious. They were congratulating her for creating the perfect upstream flooding conditions, while claiming downstream protection. It was like removing brakes to prevent tire wear. Monday delivered my ace in the hole. State Fish and Wildlife biologist Sarah Whitehorse arrived to investigate my environmental crime report. One look at the concrete installation, and her face went white as fresh snow. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, photographing dead fish scattered like crime scene evidence. This creek supports endangered bull trout populations during spawning season. What they've done here triggers automatic federal prosecution. Bull trout, endangered species, federal mandatory prosecution with unlimited fines and criminal referrals. Vivian had just graduated from local HOA tyrant to federal environmental criminal facing serious prison time. "How long until they realize what they've done?" Sarah asked, documenting habitat destruction that would cost hundreds of thousands to restore. I smiled, watching concrete poisoned water struggle through its artificial prison. About 3 weeks, when the next atmospheric river system hits these mountains. Mother Nature's about to send them a bill that'll make their legal fees look like pocket change. Weather forecasts showed Pacific storm systems building strength over the ocean. Perfect conditions for testing Vivian's concrete engineering against established physics. My 40 years of hydraulic experience said this story was about to write its own ending, and Willowbrook Estates was about to become the most expensive swimming pool in Montana. The smell of wet concrete was already fading, but the stench of impending legal disaster was just beginning to bloom like roadkill in summer heat. June brought the discovery that would transform this local skirmish into financial warfare, and it came from the most unlikely source, Vivian's own paperwork. I was researching HOA corporate structure for my legal team when I stumbled across Willowbrook's insurance policy buried in their public incorporation documents. What I found made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my morning coffee. Their comprehensive liability coverage contained one beautiful little clause. This policy excludes coverage for damages resulting from illegal modifications to natural waterways or environmental violations. Insurance companies aren't stupid. They know HOA boards do crazy shit, so they write exclusions tighter than a miser's wallet. But here's the kicker. Vivian never disclosed the creek modification project to their insurance company. I know this because a helpful county clerk mentioned seeing their insurance agent at the courthouse looking confused and carrying photos from local news coverage of the concrete pour. I called my neighbor Bill, whose wife had worked insurance fraud investigation for 20 years. "Bill, if an HOA modifies a creek without telling their insurance company, then gets sued for environmental violations, they're personally fucked," he finished. "Board members become individually liable for every penny of damages. Their coverage is voided for material misrepresentation, and those million-dollar homes become lawsuit targets." The financial math was beautiful in its simplicity. Clean Water Act violations, $37,500 daily until corrected. Endangered Species Act penalties, $50,000 per incident plus restoration costs. Concrete removal and habitat restoration, $500,000 minimum. Total potential liability, enough to bankrupt every family in Willowbrook Estates. Back in my bureau days, I'd seen environmental restoration projects that cost $300 per linear foot for simple stream work. Willowbrook's 847 feet of concrete removal sediment cleanup, and habitat reconstruction would run $400 to $600 per foot, assuming they could find contractors willing to work under federal oversight. But the real beauty was in the insurance cascade effect. Once their policy was voided for the creek modification, every other claim became questionable. House fires, theft, liability incidents, everything could be denied pending investigation of the HOA's pattern of non-disclosure. That evening, anonymous intelligence arrived via another note under my door. Vivian received notice that insurance is investigating all HOA claims. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow night. Residents demanding her resignation. Some families already talking bankruptcy lawyers. The financial pressure was creating internal warfare. Emergency HOA assessments had reached $18,000 per household for legal defense costs, and that was before federal prosecution began. Families who'd moved to Willowbrook for financial security were facing potential financial ruin. I spent that weekend calculating the perfect storm approaching Vivian's concrete empire. Federal agencies moved slowly, but inevitably, like glaciers that eventually carve canyons. Environmental prosecution carried mandatory restoration requirements that couldn't be negotiated away with political connections. My phone started ringing with calls from Willowbrook residents wanting to discuss the situation. Translation: they were realizing their HOA board had committed financial suicide and dragged the entire community into legal hell. The weather forecast showed atmospheric river systems building over the Pacific Northwest. Warm, moisture-heavy air that would dump massive precipitation on mountain snowpack. Perfect conditions for testing concrete channel capacity against natural flood dynamics. But flooding would be the least of their problems. Even if my creek never rose an inch, federal environmental prosecution would systematically dismantle their community's financial foundation, one lawsuit at a time. The smell of panic was starting to drift across the valley like smoke from a distant fire. Invisible, but unmistakable to anyone who'd learned to recognize the scent of financial disaster approaching at bureaucratic speed. Vivian's concrete solution had become everyone's expensive problem, and Mother Nature hadn't even started sending bills yet. The revelation that Willowbrook had voided their insurance coverage was like discovering your enemy had been shooting themselves in the foot while aiming at you. But I'm an engineer, not a lawyer. My revenge would be delivered by physics, not paperwork. I spent the next week conducting detailed hydraulic analysis of Vivian's concrete monstrosity, and the results were more beautiful than I dared hope. Her flood protection system had violated every principle of sustainable water management known to hydraulic science. Here's what 40 years of moving water taught me. Concrete channels work like highway overpasses. They move problems downstream faster, but when capacity is exceeded, the backup is catastrophic. Natural streams handle floods by spreading into floodplains. Concrete channels handle floods by becoming pressurized tubes that eventually explode. Vivian's crew had reduced my creek's effective channel capacity by 40%, while creating artificial bottlenecks at 3 critical points. The 90-degree concrete turn alone would create backwater effects during high flow, like putting a kink in a fire hose. Simple physics. Water doesn't negotiate with concrete. It just finds somewhere else to go. I called my old colleague Martha Clearwater, now a consulting hydrologist who testified in 47 environmental cases without losing one. Martha, I've got hydraulic stupidity that needs professional documentation. She drove up from Missoula with enough monitoring equipment to outfit a small research station. After studying Willowbrook's concrete installation, she shook her head like a doctor examining terminal cancer. Ezra, this is engineering malpractice disguised as flood control. They've created perfect conditions for upstream flooding, while claiming downstream protection. It's like installing speed bumps on fire truck routes to prevent accidents. Martha's computer modeling confirmed my calculations. Any significant precipitation event would cause my creek to back up behind concrete restrictions, flooding Willowbrook's lower elevations with water that historically flowed harmlessly downstream. We established continuous monitoring stations at 6 locations, creating real-time data networks that would document correlation between rainfall and flooding with scientific precision. If legal system wanted evidence, we'd provide enough data to satisfy the most skeptical federal prosecutors. My intelligence network was growing. 3 Willowbrook families, facing bankruptcy from emergency HOA assessments, began providing inside information about board meetings and legal strategy. Their motivation was simple: survival trumped community loyalty when your house becomes lawsuit collateral. Vivian's planning to sue you for malicious water manipulation, causing community flooding, my latest informant reported. She claims you're artificially increasing creek flow to damage their concrete project. The legal theory was insane. I can't control precipitation patterns or mountain snowmelt, but desperate people create desperate theories, and Vivian was approaching terminal desperation as federal investigations intensified. I contacted Environmental Law Clinic at University of Montana, where third-year students were eager to work high-profile environmental cases for academic credit. Better yet, their supervising attorney was Rebecca Martinez, who'd won landmark water rights cases against corporate polluters. "Mr. Blackwood," Rebecca said after reviewing my documentation, "this might be the most clear-cut environmental violation case I've seen. They've created perfect legal precedent for strict liability prosecution." The law students began preparing a comprehensive legal strategy, while I focused on physical preparations. Montana weather was showing classic atmospheric river patterns, Pacific moisture systems that dump enormous precipitation when they hit mountain barriers. I installed rain gauges and stream flow monitoring equipment throughout my property, creating alert systems for significant precipitation events. Real-time data would document exactly how Mother Nature intended to settle this dispute. My cabin and workshop were already positioned on high ground, but I moved additional valuable equipment to elevated storage and installed waterproof protection for all legal documents and evidence. If flooding came, I'd be ready to document every gallon while staying safe and dry. Meanwhile, Willowbrook's panic was becoming visible from space. For sale signs appeared on 3 houses as families tried escaping before legal apocalypse arrived. Property values were collapsing faster than confidence in Vivian's leadership. The psychological warfare was beautiful. While I maintained friendly conversations with Willowbrook residents, never discussing legal strategy or engineering concerns, Vivian's paranoia was creating community fractures that legal pressure couldn't accomplish alone. "That concrete work turned out real impressive," I told neighbors during casual encounters. "I'm sure your board thought through all the engineering angles." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The old engineer was complimenting their project, while their own experts were discovering it was environmental suicide wrapped in concrete. Final weather models confirmed atmospheric river systems approaching from Pacific Northwest, with perfect timing for testing Vivian's engineering against established hydrology. Computer simulations showed 80% probability of significant precipitation within 2 weeks. Physics doesn't negotiate, compromise, or accept bribes. It just delivers consequences with mathematical precision. And Willowbrook Estates was about to receive the most expensive education in hydraulic engineering that Montana had ever provided. July exploded with Vivian's most desperate gambit yet, a preemptive legal strike that reeked of panic mixed with expensive attorney cologne. I was replacing a broken gate hinge when legal papers arrived via certified mail, delivered by a process server who looked apologetic about the environmental crimes he was helping commit to paperwork. Willowbrook HOA was suing me for $500,000, claiming intentional water diversion, environmental sabotage, and my personal favorite, malicious upstream manipulation endangering community welfare. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of creative fiction. According to Vivian's legal theory, I'd somehow artificially increased creek flow patterns to overwhelm their concrete channel, deliberately altered natural water dynamics to damage their flood protection, and conspired with environmental extremists to destroy their community. The supporting evidence was comedy gold. Photos of normal spring runoff labeled as suspicious flow increases, testimony from their unlicensed Wyoming contractor claiming my water usage was environmentally irresponsible, and sworn statements from HOA board members who apparently believed I controlled weather patterns through malicious intent. But here's where Vivian revealed just how desperate she'd become. The lawsuit demanded an injunction requiring me to implement proper upstream water management practices and restore natural flow conditions that would somehow fix their flooding problems. She was literally suing me to control mountain snowmelt and precipitation patterns. The legal theory was so insane it belonged in a psychiatric evaluation rather than federal court. That afternoon brought her press conference, staged like a political campaign event, with matching signs and coordinated messaging. One man's spite should not endanger an entire community's safety and property values, she announced to local news crews. We're simply asking the courts to require responsible water stewardship from an upstream neighbor who refuses to acknowledge his impact on families downstream. The media manipulation was slick as ice on asphalt. She'd transformed her illegal concrete installation into professionally designed flood protection, and my legal water usage into upstream negligence threatening community safety. Environmental Law Clinic responded with legal precision that would make surgical strikes look clumsy. Rebecca Martinez filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, requesting sanctions for frivolous litigation and attorney fees for defending against environmental harassment. Your Honor, she wrote in court filings, plaintiffs are attempting to use federal courts to legitimize environmental crimes while blaming natural hydrology on defendants' malicious intent. This lawsuit demonstrates fundamental misunderstanding of both water law and basic physics. The clinic's counterattack included my engineering analysis, proving HOA claims were scientifically impossible, documentation of federal environmental violations, and expert testimony from Martha Clearwater about hydraulic engineering principles that apparently never appeared in Vivian's education. Discovery process became my favorite entertainment. Legal document requests revealed HOA board emails showing they knew permits were required but proceeded with concrete installation anyway. Internal communications proved intentional environmental violations, motivated by aesthetic preferences rather than safety concerns. The smoking gun arrived in Vivian's own words. We'll ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Easier to fix problems than prevent progress. Written evidence of criminal intent, preserved forever in digital format, and signed with her official HOA president authority. Federal agencies were circling like vultures, sensing carrion. EPA elevated their investigation to criminal referral status, while Fish and Wildlife Service calculated habitat restoration costs at $847,000, plus daily penalties until completion. Environmental prosecution was building momentum that would crush Willowbrook's legal defense like concrete crushing creek beds. Community rebellion was spreading faster than wildfire in drought conditions. 3 more board members resigned, citing legal overreach and financial irresponsibility. Emergency HOA assessments reached $23,000 per household, as legal costs consumed their reserves like cancer eating healthy tissue. Property values began collapsing as buyers discovered ongoing federal environmental prosecution and potential personal liability for residents. Real estate agents started warning clients about environmental legal complications that made Willowbrook properties untouchable for conventional financing. My position strengthened daily, while theirs deteriorated hourly. University environmental studies provided peer-reviewed research supporting every claim in my legal defense. Academic credibility carried weight that HOA desperation couldn't match in federal court proceedings. But the real pressure was building in weather patterns over the Pacific Ocean. Atmospheric river systems were strengthening into perfect storm conditions for testing concrete engineering against natural hydrology. Meteorological data showed 90% probability of significant precipitation within 10 days. Vivian's legal assault was like using a water pistol against incoming tsunami. Federal environmental law doesn't negotiate with local HOA politics, and physics doesn't care about property values or legal theories. Both were about to demonstrate why concrete channels represent engineering hubris rather than flood protection. The smell of legal desperation was mixing with atmospheric pressure changes that made old bones ache with anticipation of approaching storms. Weather and justice were converging on Willowbrook Estates with mathematical precision that would make my engineering professors proud. August brought Vivian's final descent into criminal territory, and it arrived at 2:14 a.m. with the stench of desperation mixed with trespassing and attempted destruction of property. My trail cameras captured the whole beautiful disaster. 3 figures in dark clothing creeping around my water intake system like amateur cat burglars, attempting to loosen pipe connections and create evidence of water theft. The infrared footage showed guilty faces in stark black and white, modern technology catching old-fashioned criminality in high definition. The motion-activated floodlights and alarms triggered during their sabotage attempt turning my property into a nighttime circus of confusion and panic. Security cameras recorded everything in courtroom-quality resolution, while the saboteurs scrambled like roaches when kitchen lights flip on. But here's the beautiful irony. Their attempt to frame me for water manipulation actually strengthened my legal position. Tampering with someone's water infrastructure while under federal investigation for environmental crimes is like robbing banks during FBI surveillance operations. It demonstrates consciousness of guilt with stunning clarity. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez arrived at dawn with the weary expression of someone who'd seen too many property disputes evolve into criminal stupidity. After reviewing my security footage, he shook his head like a disappointed father. These HOA folks have graduated from civil violations to criminal trespassing with attempted vandalism, he muttered, writing reports that would add criminal charges to their growing legal problems. They're digging their hole deeper with every shovel. The identified saboteurs included 2 HOA board members and Vivian's personal handyman, enough evidence to establish conspiracy charges and RICO liability for the entire board. Federal prosecutors love conspiracy cases because they can prosecute everyone involved in the criminal enterprise, not just the people holding the tools. Within hours of the failed sabotage, Vivian appeared at my gate with what she called a reasonable settlement offer, $75,000 for voluntary watershed cooperation agreement that would modify my water usage patterns to accommodate their concrete channel. "This doesn't have to be personal, Mr. Blackwood," she said with the smile of someone offering poisoned candy. "Surely we can find a business-like solution that benefits everyone involved." I recorded the entire conversation using my phone's legal recording app. Montana allows single-party consent recording, which means her attempted bribery was now preserved in digital evidence that federal prosecutors would find very interesting. "Ma'am, my water rights aren't for sale," I replied calmly, "and neither is my compliance with federal environmental law." Her desperation was becoming pathological. The woman who'd started this war to control aesthetic concerns was now attempting to influence federal environmental enforcement through cash payments, a federal crime that carries serious prison time. I immediately provided the bribery recording to FBI field office in Billings, where white-collar crime investigators added it to their growing file of HOA environmental violations. Federal agents love cases with clear audio evidence of attempted corruption. Community support was consolidating behind my position like military allies recognizing the winning side. Local ranchers and farmers understood the precedent of protecting water access rights from suburban development pressure. Regional newspaper ran editorials supporting my defense of agricultural water rights against HOA overreach. Montana Environmental Action joined my legal support team, providing professional environmental attorneys who specialized in Clean Water Act prosecution. Trout Unlimited offered expert testimony about habitat restoration costs and ecological damage assessment. My legal team was growing while Willowbrooks was bleeding money faster than arterial wounds. Vivian's public relations disasters were going viral on social media platforms. The sabotage video clips were shared thousands of times with captions like, "HOA gone wild," and "When Karens attack." Local television news ran investigative series titled Environmental Destruction in Paradise Valley that made Vivian the poster child for HOA environmental crimes. Federal investigation was intensifying, like gathering thunderstorms. EPA elevated the case to criminal prosecution level, treating environmental violations as potential felonies rather than civil infractions. Fish and Wildlife Service calculated restoration costs exceeding $847,000 for habitat reconstruction under federal oversight. The financial pressure was creating psychological breakdown symptoms. Willowbrook residents reported Vivian showing signs of extreme stress, weight loss, erratic behavior, paranoid accusations against neighbors who questioned her leadership. Emergency HOA meetings had devolved into shouting matches about bankruptcy lawyers and exit strategies. But Mother Nature was preparing the final verdict. Weather forecasts showed massive atmospheric river system building over Pacific Ocean, perfect conditions for delivering the most expensive hydrology lesson in Montana history. Meteorological data indicated 95% probability of significant precipitation within 72 hours. My documentation equipment was ready to record flooding that would vindicate my engineering calculations, while demonstrating catastrophic failure of Vivian's concrete solution. Trail cameras positioned at strategic locations would capture visual evidence showing direct correlation between concrete installation and upstream flooding. The smell of approaching storm systems mixed with panic sweat was drifting across the valley like chemical signatures of approaching justice. Physics and federal law were converging on Willowbrook Estates, with the inevitability of gravity and the precision of mathematics. Vivian's concrete crusade was about to meet its Waterloo, delivered by the same creek she'd tried to imprison. August 15th, 6:23 a.m. The atmospheric river system hit Montana like nature's own fire hose, aimed directly at Vivian's concrete engineering experiment. I was drinking coffee and watching rain gauge readings climb when the real show began. 3.5 inches fell in 4 hours. Not a 100-year flood, barely a 15-year event, but enough water to expose every flaw in Willowbrook's concrete channel design. The drumming of heavy rain on metal roofing sounded like nature's way of announcing that physics class was officially in session, and tuition was about to be collected in full. My creek flow jumped from normal 45 cubic feet per second to 340 CFS by 10 a.m., transforming from gentle mountain stream into liquid bulldozer, carrying the authority of established hydrology against amateur engineering. 11:47 a.m. Vivian's concrete channel began backing up water at the artificial 90-degree turn, exactly as my calculations predicted. The rigid channel couldn't handle volume that natural meandering creek had absorbed effortlessly for 136 years. Time-lapse cameras captured water rising steadily behind the concrete bottleneck, like liquid evidence of engineering incompetence. 12:23 p.m. First Willowbrook home reported water in basement. Ironically, Vivian's own house, positioned perfectly to receive the inaugural flood, courtesy of her concrete masterpiece. The woman who destroyed my creek to protect property values was about to discover that insurance doesn't cover damages caused by environmental crimes. Within 2 hours, 23 homes had standing water, 8 homes had significant flooding, and Willowbrook Estates looked like a suburban Venice designed by someone who'd failed basic engineering. My drone footage captured the entire disaster in real time, streaming live to YouTube, where 47,000 viewers watched HOA Karma unfold with the entertainment value of reality television and the educational content of physics demonstration. County Emergency Management declared localized flood emergency, while fire department pumps worked overtime removing water from homes. Emergency responders identified the concrete channel as the primary flooding cause, official government documentation that would devastate any remaining legal defense. 3:15 p.m. Vivian arrived at my gate with sheriff's deputy and local news crew in tow, staging her final desperate performance for public consumption. "This man has destroyed our community out of spite and selfishness," she screamed at cameras, while standing in ankle-deep water that her own concrete had created. "He's manipulated creek flow to cause intentional flooding." Her accusation was beautiful in its impossibility. I can't control atmospheric rivers or mountain precipitation, but desperate people create desperate theories when reality contradicts their worldview. Time for my mic drop moment. I calmly approached the news cameras carrying drone footage, engineering calculations, and 40 years of hydraulic experience. "Ma'am, water doesn't lie," I said with the patience of someone explaining gravity to children. "Your concrete told my creek where to go. The creek disagreed." I displayed engineering analysis, proving concrete reduced channel capacity by 40%, creating perfect conditions for upstream flooding during normal precipitation events. The math was simple enough for television audiences to understand. Concrete channels fail when natural systems succeed. "This is a 15-year storm, not a 100-year storm," I explained to reporters. "Your concrete just made it behave like a 500-year flood." The live television coverage captured Vivian's complete psychological breakdown when confronted with undeniable video evidence of her engineering failure. Her attempts to blame climate change and unprecedented rainfall crumbled like concrete under hydraulic pressure. Sheriff's deputy reviewed flood documentation and confirmed concrete installation as the primary flooding cause. Law enforcement validation that would support federal prosecution and civil liability claims. EPA emergency response team arrived within hours, treating the disaster as environmental crime scene requiring immediate federal intervention. Fish and Wildlife Service documented fish kill from concrete runoff during flooding, providing visual evidence of ecological damage that would horrify federal prosecutors. Community Turning Point arrived with emergency HOA meeting, demanding Vivian's immediate resignation. Residents facing flood damage and bankruptcy from legal costs finally recognized that their board president had committed financial suicide while dragging the entire community into federal legal hell. 3 families announced lawsuits against HOA for flood damage caused by illegal environmental modifications. Property insurance companies confirmed no coverage for damages resulting from unpermitted construction activities, leaving residents personally liable for destruction caused by their own board's environmental crimes. Media frenzy transformed local HOA conflict into national environmental justice story. HOA floods itself became social media phenomenon, while interview requests flooded in from CNN, Fox News, and environmental news outlets. But my favorite moment came during the evening damage assessment, when I offered flood victims temporary water access and free engineering consultation for cleanup efforts. The creek doesn't care about our arguments, I told affected residents. Let's focus on helping people. Total flood damage, $2.3 million in property destruction, caused by concrete installation designed to prevent flooding. The irony was so thick you could cut it with engineering tools and serve it at HOA board meetings. Concrete channel was declared immediate environmental hazard, requiring emergency removal at HOA expense. The most expensive flood protection project in county history had become the most expensive environmental disaster, proving that Mother Nature always gets the final word in conversations about hydraulic engineering. September brought environmental justice, delivered with the precision of mathematics and the satisfaction of watching physics-grade Vivian's engineering homework. Federal concrete removal began under EPA supervision, creating the most expensive construction project in county history, $1.2 million for habitat restoration, plus $300,000 in daily penalties accumulated during the violation period. Willowbrook's emergency assessments reached $28,000 per household, transforming their gated paradise into a financial purgatory. Vivian Ashworth Sterling resigned in disgrace and fled Montana like a war criminal escaping prosecution. Her replacement, a retired forest ranger named Patricia Wells, won election on a platform of environmental cooperation and legal compliance. The new HOA board's first official act was issuing a public apology and acknowledging my water rights, something that should have happened before the first concrete truck arrived. Sometimes wisdom comes expensive, but it always comes eventually. Environmental Law Clinic's victory set legal precedent for water rights protection against HOA overreach. My settlement included $150,000 for legal costs and harassment damages, plus ironclad guarantees that my creek would flow unmolested until the sun burns out or Montana becomes oceanfront property. University of Montana students conducted 3-year stream restoration that exceeded pre-concrete conditions. The project became academic case study for environmental engineering programs nationwide. Proof that Mother Nature forgives environmental crimes if you're willing to pay restoration costs and learn from expensive mistakes. Creek habitat recovery was miraculous. Endangered bull trout populations returned within 18 months, spawning in gravel beds that federal biologists carefully reconstructed using techniques learned from destroying Vivian's concrete monstrosity. Fish don't hold grudges, they just need clean water and proper habitat. Community transformation was equally dramatic. The new Creek Stewardship Committee included me as technical advisor for monthly meetings about watershed protection and flood management. Former enemies became allies in environmental conservation, proving that shared disasters sometimes create stronger communities than shared prosperity. Willowbrook residents replaced decorative landscaping with native plants and rain gardens designed to work with natural water patterns instead of fighting them. Property values recovered and exceeded pre-conflict levels as buyers recognized genuine environmental stewardship over artificial aesthetic control. I established the Sarah Blackwood Environmental Education Fund, honoring my late wife's memory through scholarships for rural students studying water engineering. The fund supports kids who understand that water flows downhill, regardless of HOA votes or property values. Annual Creek Day Festival celebrates successful environmental restoration, with fishing contests, environmental education booths, and barbecue dinners featuring locally sourced ingredients. The celebration attracts visitors from across the region for environmental tours and education about cooperative water management. Montana State University created the Willowbrook case study for environmental law classes, while engineering schools use our documentation as cautionary tale about concrete channels versus natural stream management. Students learn that Mother Nature doesn't grade on curves. Physics exams have only one correct answer. Documentary film Concrete versus Creek won Environmental Film Festival awards and continues inspiring grassroots environmental activism nationwide. The story resonates because everyone understands David versus Goliath narratives, especially when Goliath defeats himself through arrogance and environmental stupidity. County government adopted stricter environmental review processes, requiring upstream neighbor consultation for all water modifications. The Willowbrook rule prevents future HOA environmental crimes through mandatory engineering review and federal agency notification. My morning coffee routine returned to peaceful creek watching, accompanied by sounds of flowing water over stones instead of concrete mixers destroying habitat. Evening fly fishing yields record trout catches in restored pools where native cutthroats hide beneath overhanging willows. The satisfaction isn't just personal, it's mathematical. Engineering principles worked exactly as predicted, environmental law functioned as designed, and community cooperation proved more profitable than environmental destruction. Final statistics tell the story. 847 feet of concrete removed, $2.3 million in flood damage prevented from recurring, $800,000 in habitat restoration, 47 families learning that cooperation beats confrontation when physics keeps score.
You know what gets me about Israel's story? It wasn't the $2.3 million in flood damage that taught the real lesson. It was watching a 67-year-old engineer sitting on his porch drinking coffee while concrete trucks destroy his family, a 136-year-old creek. Most guys would have grabbed a shotgun or called a lawyer. Israel just got his cameras ready. See, that's the difference between panic and patience. While Vivian was rushing to pour concrete and file lawsuits, Israel was doing math. He knew exactly what happens when you try to control water that's been flowing since before Montana was a state. Physics doesn't care about your HOA fees or property values. Water goes where water goes. The man spent 40 years moving rivers for the government. He understood that some fights you win by not fighting. You win by knowing what's coming next and documenting everything. So here's my question. When someone with a clipboard shows up claiming authority over your property, do you panic or do you document? Because the difference between those two responses can cost you everything. Or in Vivian's case, cost them $2.3 million. Hit that like button if you've been dealt with HOA overreach and subscribe for more stories about what happened when small power meets big consequences. Sometimes the smartest move is just getting out of physics way.